The land spoke before anything else did. It rolled out in every direction like a golden sermon, acres upon acres of sun-baked Texas earth, cut through with ribbons of dry creek, and crowned with a sky so vast and blue it made a person feel both small and strangely alive. Cattle moved in slow, dark clusters along the far ridge, and the air carried the smell of hay, horse, and something faintly sweet that might have been the wild sage growing along the fence posts. This was Hargrove land. Every rock, every blade of burnt grass, every shadow the clouds threw across the hills Hargrove. At the center of it all sat the ranch house. It was not a delicate building. It had been built by stubborn hands in a stubborn decade, with thick timber walls, a wide wraparound porch, and windows that caught the afternoon light like open, watchful eyes. A stone chimney rose from its left side, and a split-rail fence ran the length of the front yard where two old oak trees had been standing longer than anyone on the property could remember. It was grand without being fragile. It looked, in short, exactly like the woman who owned it. Eleanor Hargrove, Gran L., as she was known from San Antonio to Abilene, sat in her high-backed chair on that porch every morning at sunrise without exception. She was 70 years old, white-haired, sharp-jawed, and possessed of a gaze so precise it could locate dishonesty in a man the way a hawk locates a field mouse from 200 feet in the air. She had buried a husband, outlasted 3 droughts, negotiated cattle contracts that made grown men nervous, and raised 1 grandson who was, in her private estimation, equal parts her greatest pride and her most persistent problem. That grandson's name was Cole Hargrove, and he was, at 32, everything the land had made him: tall, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair that stayed wind-blown regardless of effort, and a jaw that seemed to have been cut from the same rock as the ranch house foundation. The men who worked his cattle respected him without question. The women in the surrounding towns admired him from a careful distance. Cole Hargrove was handsome in the way a storm on the horizon was handsome, impressive, undeniable, and not entirely safe to approach. He had not always been so guarded. 3 years earlier, a woman named Catherine had arrived in the county, lovely and soft-spoken, full of warm glances and gentle words. Cole had opened his chest like a door and let her walk straight through it. 6 months later, she had left with a significant sum borrowed on false pretenses and a traveling man from San Antonio, and Cole had quietly closed that door, nailed it shut, and done his best to forget it had ever existed. Gran L. had watched all of this with both sorrow and patience. It was patience in the end that carried her one afternoon in late September to the small, struggling town of Cutter's Creek, 12 miles east of the ranch. She had gone for supplies and stayed for a conversation, the kind that happens when a woman listens carefully in a general store. 2 names kept surfacing, spoken by different mouths in the same gentle tone. Mae Calloway, Rosa Calloway. Their story came out in pieces. Their parents, good, hard-working frontier people, had died within a week of each other from a fever that swept through Cutter's Creek the previous spring. The sisters had stayed, holding the small farm together through summer with nothing but determination and each other. They had shared their cornmeal with a neighboring widow. They had sat with sick children when other families stayed away for fear of illness. They had asked for nothing, not once. Gran L. found them before sundown. Mae was 27, the elder, with calm brown eyes, dark hair pinned back without fuss, and a manner of speaking that was quiet but precise, as though she chose every word the way a careful person chooses which stone to step on crossing a creek. Rosa was 25, a degree lighter in everything, lighter on her feet, quicker to laugh, with a gap in her front teeth that appeared whenever something genuinely struck her as funny, which was often. They were thin. The farm showed it, but their backs were straight. Gran L. did not offer charity. She was far too wise for that, and she recognized women who would refuse it. She offered something else, a place, a name, and the particular kind of belonging that cannot be purchased because it comes only from being genuinely wanted. She told them plainly that she was an old woman with a large house, more rooms than she needed, and a stubborn heart that had recently decided it required daughters. Mae and Rosa exchanged one long look between them, the compressed language of sisters, and accepted. Cole received the news 4 days later, arriving back at the ranch after a cattle drive with dust on every surface of him, and the particular tiredness that lives in the bones rather than the muscles. Gran L met him on the porch with sweet tea and the calm expression she used when delivering information that he would not immediately appreciate. He listened. He did not speak for a long moment. "Every fortune-chasing woman in the county knows your name, Gran L," he finally said, not unkindly. "These two don't chase anything," she replied. "They plant." He was not convinced, and Gran L, who had not survived 70 Texas years by misreading people, had anticipated exactly that. She set her tea down, folded her hands, and proposed the arrangement: 30 days, a borrowed name, a set of working clothes, and the freedom to draw his own conclusions. Cole Hargrove would become Jack, a newly hired ranch hand, and observe the sisters without the shadow of his name falling across everything. He agreed, with the private certainty of a man who expected to be proven right. The wagon carrying Mae and Rosa Calloway arrived the following morning just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. Before either of them had stepped fully down from the seat, Mae turned to the housekeeper standing at the door and asked, in a voice without performance, whether there was anything that needed doing. 50 feet away, half hidden by the barn door in a worn hat and borrowed clothes, a man named Jack watched and said nothing. But his jaw had loosened just slightly from the shape it usually held. The first week passed like water over flat stone, quietly, and leaving more behind than it appeared to. Jack Cole had expected performance. He had expected the sisters to move through the ranch house like guests at a hotel, accepting comfort with both hands while offering appreciation with their mouths. He had seen that particular dance before, and he knew every step of it. Instead, Mae and Rosa Calloway moved through the Hargrove household the way people move through a place they intend to care for. They rose before the housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle. They learned where things belonged and put them back there. They did not ask what was available to them. They asked what was needed from them. It was, Cole admitted privately to his horse one evening, not what he had prepared for. Still, he watched. That was the arrangement, and Cole Hargrove had never been a man who abandoned an arrangement midway through simply because it became inconvenient. His days as Jack fell into a natural rhythm. He chopped wood at the eastern side of the house each morning, mended fence line through the afternoon, and kept the horses watered and settled at dusk. It was honest work, and he found he did not resent it. What unsettled him was how quickly Mae Calloway inserted herself into the edges of it, not intrusively, but with a consistency that was difficult to ignore. She brought water. Every morning, without announcement, she appeared at the woodpile with a tin cup and set it on the fence post within his reach. She never lingered to make conversation of it. She simply brought the water, offered a nod that was neither shy nor forward, and returned to whatever task had preceded the errand. Cole told himself this meant nothing. She likely brought water to every working hand on the property. He checked quietly. She did not. Rosa, meanwhile, was a different kind of presence entirely. Where Mae was still water, Rosa was a creek running over smooth rocks, constant, cheerful, and entirely capable of soaking you through if you stood too close. She had introduced herself to every horse in the stable by name within the first 2 days, invented a private nickname for each of the barn cats, and managed to overturn an entire flour sack in the kitchen on the 3rd morning while attempting to help Mrs. Doyle with baking. The resulting cloud of white that rolled out through the kitchen door caused 3 ranch hands to look up from their breakfast in alarm. Rosa stood in the middle of it, flour in her hair and on her nose, and laughed so completely that everyone within earshot found themselves laughing with her before they understood why. Cole had turned away quickly on that occasion. He had felt something threaten the straight line of his mouth, and he was not ready to surrender it. But it was Mae who was quietly, persistently, dismantling things he had spent 3 years constructing. She read in the evenings real books, carried from Cutter's Creek wrapped in cloth to protect them. She spoke to the horses in the low, unhurried tone of someone who genuinely expected to be understood. She listened when others spoke, with her full attention in a way that made a person feel that what they were saying mattered, not because she was performing courtesy, but because she was actually present. Cole had met very few people in his life who were actually present. He told himself he was simply observing. That was the agreement. On the 14th night, the sky made a liar of the calm afternoon that had preceded it. The storm came fast and low, the way Texas storms did, without apology and without warning. Thunder moved across the ridge like heavy furniture being dragged across a floor, and the rain arrived in sheets rather than drops. Cole was securing the stable doors when he heard Mrs. Doyle call from the house that a calf had been spotted near the lower creek bed, separated from its mother in the confusion of the gathering herd. He reached for his lantern. Mae was already past him. She had pulled on an oilcloth coat 2 sizes too large, likely belonging to Gran L, and was moving through the rain toward the lower pasture with a lantern of her own and the focused expression of someone who had already decided an argument about staying behind was not worth the time it would consume. Cole caught up to her in 3 long strides and said nothing, because there was nothing efficient to say, and efficiency was what the moment required. They found the calf wedged against a boulder at the creek's edge, the water rising fast around its hooves, trembling and vocal and thoroughly miserable. Getting it free required both of them, Cole on one side, Mae on the other, the mud pulling at their boots and the rain reducing visibility to almost nothing. The calf fought them the way frightened animals fight help, without logic and with considerable force. Mae was knocked sideways once, caught herself, and immediately resumed her position without comment. They got it free. They walked it back to the stable between them, the calf stumbling and leaning, both of them soaked to the interior of their bones. When they finally latched the stable door and turned to face each other in the dry, lantern-lit warmth of the barn, Mae pushed her soaked hair from her face, looked at the trembling calf now pressed against its mother's side, and laughed, sudden, breathless, completely unguarded. Cole looked at her in that moment, rain still dripping from the brim of his hat, and felt something in his chest come loose from where it had been anchored for 3 years. He looked away before she could see it. He was not yet ready for what that meant. 2 days later, Beaumont Price rode up the main road on a horse that cost more than most men earned in a year, dressed in a fashion better suited to a city parlor than a working ranch. He was the son of the neighboring landowner, polished, broad-smiled, and entirely aware of his own advantages. His interest in Mae was immediate and unconcealed. Mae was courteous. She was also unmoved. That evening, through the kitchen window, Cole overheard her tell Rosa in a plain, unhurried voice that a man who introduced himself by listing what he owned was a man advertising that he had little else to offer. Rosa had laughed. Cole had stood motionless beneath the window for a long moment after. On the 28th evening, Gran L found him at the fence line where the land dropped toward the southern pasture. She stood beside him in comfortable silence for a while, the way old women with accurate instincts allow silence to do their work for them. "The 30 days are nearly finished, grandson," she said at last. "What have you learned?" Cole kept his eyes on the darkening horizon. "That I was wrong about them." And he was quiet for a long stretch. "That being wrong about them has made everything considerably more complicated." Gran L said nothing further. She simply patted his arm once and walked back toward the house, and he had the distinct, uncomfortable impression that she had known this was coming before he had saddled his horse for the cattle drive that started everything. That same night, Mae sat on the porch steps in the cooling air and told the man she knew as Jack that he was the most honest-feeling person on the ranch. Cole rode out to the far southern pasture afterward and stayed there until the stars completed their rotation overhead. A man caught squarely between who he had been pretending to be and the truth that was now entirely too large to keep contained. The 28th day arrived wearing the particular brightness of a morning that does not know what it is about to break. Mae had risen early, as she always did, and was crossing the yard toward the garden with a water pail when the sound of an approaching rider drew her attention to the main road. The man who dismounted was broad, weathered, and dressed in the practical clothing of someone who moved cattle and money in roughly equal measure. He tied his horse at the post, surveyed the ranch with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had visited many times before, and then spotted the figure emerging from the stable with a saddle thrown over one arm. His face opened into immediate recognition. "Mr. Hargrove." The cattle merchant called across the yard, raising one hand in greeting. "Fine morning to find you home, sir. I was hoping we might discuss the autumn contract." The saddle landed in the dirt. Mae stood completely still, the water pail hanging from her hand, the morning light falling across a face that had gone very quiet in the way faces go quiet when something large and structural is rearranging itself behind the eyes. She looked at the man the merchant was walking toward, the worn hat, the familiar stride, the jaw she had studied without meaning to for 4 weeks, and she placed every piece with the steady, unhurried precision that was simply how Mae Calloway's mind worked. Jack, the ranch hand who spoke too carefully, whose hands were calloused but whose bearing belonged to no servant she had ever encountered, who had ridden out to the southern pasture and returned looking like a man who had argued with himself and lost. Cole met her eyes across the yard. She set the pail down on the ground with a gentleness that was somehow more final than if she had thrown it, turned, and walked toward the creek path without a word. Cole handed the merchant off to the ranch foreman with 4 words and followed her. The morning birds continued their business. The cattle moved on the ridge. The world declined to acknowledge that anything significant was occurring. Mae was standing at the creek's edge when he reached her, the same creek where the storm had driven them together 2 weeks earlier. She was not crying. She was looking at the water with her arms folded and her spine straight, and when she turned to face him, her expression held no fury. It held something more difficult than fury. It held disappointment measuring itself against something that did not want to be dismissed. "Tell me plainly," she said, "all of it." So he did. He told her about Catherine and the hollow months afterward. He told her about Gran L's plan and his own willing participation in it, born from the arrogance of a man who believed he already knew what he was going to find. He told her about the water left on the fence post every morning, about the storm, about the moment in the lantern-lit barn when he had looked at her laughing and felt 3 years of careful construction come apart like dry timber. He told her that he had spent the last 2 nights rehearsing this conversation, and that every version he had prepared had dissolved the moment she turned her eyes on him, leaving him with nothing but the plain, undecorated truth, that he was sorry for the deception, that she and Rosa were the most genuinely good people who had ever set foot on this land, and that his feelings for her were the most honest thing he currently possessed. Mae listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, the creek ran on between them for a long moment. "I have never wanted anything from this ranch," she said at last, her voice even. "Not the land, not the name, not what any of it is worth. Rosa and I came with nothing, and we understood that we might return to nothing. That was never the part that mattered." "I know that now," Cole said. "What you did not trust," she continued, "was not our intentions. You did not trust your own judgment. That is a different thing entirely, Cole Hargrove, and it is not something I caused." The accuracy of it landed without softness. Cole accepted it in silence, which was the only honest response available. It was Rosa who shifted the air. She had come quietly down the creek path. She had, in truth, been watching from the garden since the merchant's arrival, because Rosa Calloway had suspected the truth about Jack for the better part of 2 weeks, and had kept her own counsel about it with considerable patience. She stepped up beside her sister and looked at Cole with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a person who has already rendered a verdict and is simply announcing it. "I knew who you were," she told him simply. "I watched you the way you were watching us." She paused. "You looked at me the way the land looks at the rain, like it had been waiting without knowing it was waiting." She glanced at her sister. "A man pretending wouldn't look at a woman like that, Mae. A man pretending would remember to stop." Mae said nothing, but the rigid line of her shoulders released, fractionally, like a door unlocking without yet opening. Gran L arrived before the silence could harden again. She walked down the creek path with her cane and her unhurried dignity, and she stood before both sisters with an expression that carried no deflection in it. She told them that the plan had been hers entirely, constructed without apology and accepted without reservation. She told them she had brought them to the ranch because she had recognized their souls in a general store in Cutter's Creek and had not been willing to leave those souls behind in a failing town. She told them the deception had not been designed to protect the ranch's fortune. It was designed, she said, looking briefly at her grandson, to protect a boy who forgot how to believe in people. The ranch survives without trust. He does not. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, because Gran L had always understood that certain conversations needed room to finish themselves. Cole found me at the creek again near golden hour, when the Texas sky was doing the extravagant thing it did in the last 40 minutes of daylight, burning orange and deep red across the horizon like something being celebrated. He came without rehearsal and without the protection of any prepared words. He came simply as himself, hat held in both hands, standing in the ordinary dirt of the land his family had built. He asked her one question. If the name meant nothing and the acres meant nothing and the ranch house with its watchful windows meant nothing, would she stay? Mae looked at the horizon for a long, unhurried moment. The kind of moment that does not rush because it understands its own significance. Then she turned and looked at the man in front of her, not the rancher, not Jack, not the Hargrove name, just the man, standing unguarded in the last light of the day. "I didn't stay for the land, Jack," she said. The laugh that came out of Cole Hargrove was full and unguarded and entirely free. The laugh of a man who had not realized how long he had been holding his breath until the moment he finally stopped. He proposed with no speech and no performance, just his eyes and the question in them, plain as the creek and the sky. Mae answered in the same language. 6 weeks later, the Hargrove Ranch hosted a wedding. There were wildflowers in every jar and vase that could be located on the property. Mrs. Doyle had been cooking for 3 days. The ranch hands had cleaned up to varying degrees of success and stood in a comfortable row near the fence, hats in hand. Rosa stood beside her sister in a dress that Gran L had quietly commissioned from the dressmaker in town, her gap-toothed smile present from the first moment of the morning and uninterrupted throughout. A fiddle player from Cutter's Creek played something that started formal and gradually became something people wanted to move to. Gran L sat in the chair brought out from the porch and placed in the precise spot where the oak tree's shadow fell at late afternoon. She did not cry, because she was not a woman who cried at outcomes she had engineered with great deliberateness. She simply sat with the particular satisfaction of someone who had planted something in uncertain soil and watched it grow past every doubt. Cole and Mae stood together at the edge of the porch as the fiddle song wound down, and the firelight began to matter more than the sunlight. The land ran out before them in every direction, golden, wide, and patient, the way it had always been, the way it would continue to be long after everyone standing on it was gone. Mae leaned slightly against his arm. Cole did not move away. The west was wide and the sky was endless, and for the first time in a long time, Cole Hargrove was not afraid of either.